Hi everybody, welcome back to a very special enhanced podcast edition of the Stellium Astrology Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie James, and today I have a very special guest with me, Wade Caves, who is a Horary and Electional astrologer. I've met Wade on a number of occasions. On one occasion, I turned up to a class on electional astrology with you, and the sign outside the door said, Wave Caves. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So,
when I was in middle school, I had a teacher. His name was Mr. Arblaster, Winston Arblaster, and he was British, and I was in the US at the time. And he liked to do, are they spoonerisms where you swap syllables out?
Yes, I like doing things like that.
Yeah, so he called me Cade Waves all the time. So I'm used to seeing my name changed all sorts of ways, and you know, Wave is one of the nicer ones.
Wave Caves was quite good. It was very evocative. It sounded very Pluto, actually, to me.
Yeah.
And actually, when we were at the conference a couple of years ago, you know, the AA conference where there was a fire in one of the hotel rooms. Do you remember that?
I do.
Yeah. You said that conference was crazy. Lots of drama. But yeah, basically, you were saying when we were sitting around the table that you actually have a Sun-Pluto conjunction that you didn't even have a clue about until
square, not conjunction, but it's square. But it's one of the closest aspects of my chart. Yeah, I remember the day that both of the luminaries are in very close contact to Pluto, which is why I'm sure everybody else experiences me as light and fluffy and super enjoyable. But yeah, I've got a moon Neptune sextile that's exact same degree. Wow. And then Sun Pluto square, and I don't know why I had never picked up on that. And when I saw it, I just thought, oh my god.
Yeah, it's so funny, isn't it? How you can just you can look at your chart for years, and then suddenly something jumps out that you've never seen before.
And this was one of those situations where I just felt like, wow, I feel a little bit taken aback. And it also caused me to realize I've got a Moon Neptune trine.
Yeah.
I was the Neptune and Capricorn generation. I'm part of that. So I have a Moon in Virgo and trine to that. So and Uranus is where my focus had always been, because Uranus and Saturn, I was born on the conjunction that happened in 88 in the 29th final degree of Sagittarius.
Right. Yeah.
But Uranus is connected to everything in my chart. So Saturn, Mars, Jupiter, Mercury, the Sun, Venus, literally every planet except for.
Wow.
Is there an except for? I don't think so. All of my planets are in very late degrees. Like I have everything from 15 onward. So I'm a back half of the sign kind of girl. And Uranus is at 29. So the worst we could say is like maybe it's a little bit like far away for it to be in orb with Uranus, but everything eventually comes back in contact with it, which means it also comes back in contact with Saturn because there's that conjunction. Yeah, so, you know, it's quite, but I have, because I teach a lot, right? And I'm very quick to chat and talk and, you know, all that kind of, and I'm doing it now where I'm just
fine.
And folks are always like, you know, where's your Mercury? And I just, you know, I never want to talk about my chart because I don't want people projecting onto me.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just like, we're here to just focus on other people.
Exactly.
Not me today. And inevitably they what they're trying to say is they're getting a heavy Uranus flavor, but they can't quite pick up on the way that so some people will say like you feel like Mercury in Aries or but it's Mercury in Aquarius, 27 Aquarius, and then it's in very close sextile to that Uranus and
oh right.
So I never noticed Pluto or Neptune because Uranus just took all my attention, you know.
Yeah, so. You do have planets that steal the show in your chart, and I think I was really focused. I have Neptune at 27 Sag in my 7th house, and I was always really not obsessed with it, but just because my relationships were always very Neptunian, I was very interested in that. And then you look at other aspects in your chart. I had I've got Mercury, Venus and Mercury squaring Saturn and Pluto in my chart. I'm a bit of an older generation to you.
Sorry, say that again. Venus and Mercury.
In conjunction in Aquarius, and both of them are square Saturn and Pluto. I've got Pluto at 29 Libra, and I've got Saturn at 3 of Scorpio. So that's quite a big one in my chart. But you've got all these different things that kind of really steal the show, and then you've got the ones that just sneak up on you. I've got a lovely Jupiter Mercury sextile that I had no idea about until I went to see somebody, and they were like, "Look at that lovely sextile," and I was like, oh my God, I've never even seen it before. So Yeah, so it's funny how these things creep up, and it did make me laugh when I was sitting at that table with you at the conference, and you mentioned that Sun Pluto contact in your chart, and I was like, that's such a funny one, because Pluto is, for some of the listeners who aren't so familiar with all the astro lingo, Pluto is the most mysterious planet. So you can almost forgive you for overlooking that, because it doesn't want to be discovered.
That's right. And for me, I have Pluto in the 12th house, and my sun is in the 3rd. So they're both cadent. And, I would add into this that cadent planets just do not jump out at you either.
I'm going to have to say, I have Chiron in my 12th. It took me until I went to India, and Chiron was relocated to my midheaven for me to really understand what that was.
I don't need you to go any more in detail. If you're saying India, Chiron, midheaven, I already know what the story must have been.
Yeah. I mean, I have actually recorded a show that will be coming out about that.
Okay.
And I'm quite open about it. But I think it really brought the ethical aspect of consultation into the fore for me. And I thought that it was a really important subject to cover, because there's a lot of people out there on Instagram, offering free readings with no idea of the consequences of the things that they say.
Oh boy, don't get me started on astrology and social media.
I know. It's such a hot topic at the moment, isn't it? And when I go on Facebook, and there's groups with some of the astrologers that I know that we probably mingle with at the conferences, who are getting really angry. There's so much plagiarism. Nobody's crediting each other's work. And, there's so many arguments over so many different things that are just, the astrology is changing. It's shifting, it's evolving, isn't it, at the moment? And it's been around for such a long time, but it's things like the masculine and feminine assignments to things, and the identities. That's really challenging, actually. It's a modern issue.
You've opened it now, Stephanie. So
I know. What did I do?
No, it's okay, but it's one of these things. Just for my own benefit, I'm seeing I just look so. So what Stephanie I've had to do, like I'm in a new apartment. And I haven't figured out the lighting. So for those of you watching, I've got these like orbs, and I'm trying, but everything's lighting from underneath. I'm looking at this going, wow, you look absolutely ghastly.
You don't.
But I just want to say I'm much prettier in person.
Wade, I was going to introduce Wade as astrologer extraordinaire and devistatingly handsome man.
Oh my God, that's so polite. I was just joking about the pretty thing.
I'm dead serious.
Get back to me about what you're doing after.
I just didn't want to butter him up too much, but there you go. I've gone and done it now, haven't I?
So the social media thing. I mean, I've had a lot of time to kind of think about it, because I mean, I'm not really good with social media anyway. It's not a place where people with personalities like me do it especially well, unless they really enjoy being a bit of a thorn in people's side, which I don't. It's a natural thing that kind of happens to me on social media, because I don't take super close care of how I word things, and you have to if you're on social media, otherwise it just comes out the way that But one of the things that I've kind of observed is astrology is changing. That's a good thing to put out there in terms of for better, for worse. Are we moving in a direction that feels healthy? Does it feel like we're moving the community forward? I think a lot of people would argue, I'll tell you what I think, and then maybe I'd be interested in what your thoughts are too. Okay. I mean, astrology is definitely, it's becoming more democratic. You go on Twitter, you go on Instagram, and what you are finding are people who have spent very little time, invested time into really getting to the heart of the symbolism, the history of the symbolism. Why has it developed the way that it has developed? What are the ideas that we need to challenge? Because I think what happens is you get a lot of young people who are in their 20s, early 20s, 18, 19, 20, 21, calling themselves master astrologers because they go on Twitter and have about 20,000 followers, and that's about all it takes. And there's a real dedication to sun sign astrology, but also, I think what ends up happening too is that, when you don't have a really firm, whole, well-rounded understanding of a principle or an idea, the way that it evolved over multiple centuries, if you're only fixed on one period of time, if you're only fixed on the Hellenistic era, or only fixed on the medieval era, or only fixed on what happened in the 1900s, in psychological astrology, you are choosing to not understand a whole lot about how we have arrived at where we are today. And I think what, kind of concerns me a little bit, I don't want to say concerns because I so don't care, but like on the other hand, it's like, this is my profession. And so I want to be part of the community and join in this conversation. But you get people who are grabbing onto ideas like essential dignities, for instance, and writing whole diatribes and think pieces about needing to completely strip away this, that, the other based on incomplete understanding of the development of that symbolism and the development of that principle, the way that it's applied. And so you read things and think like, I am so on board with your intent. And I just can't personally share this with the community that I engage with, because my deeper concern is I don't think you understood what essential dignities is and is not in the first place. I think you've read one or two books and you picked up on a phrase you didn't like, and then you really, went deep into it. And now we're in this kind of like space where, well, what do we do? Where do we go? Where does that take us? And the door's getting wider, more people are coming through, and people, I've spoken with some people and say like, at the end of the day, isn't it great that astrology is getting more attention? I don't know that that's true. I think it is very much connected to consumerism, the idea that if we can just grow and grow and grow and get more people to consume and be at the table and be, that in itself is a good thing, that's a good end. And I'm not sure that I'm convinced of that. I don't know that I can point to a time in history where astrology has become popular, where it didn't very quickly become illegal in certain parts of the world. Forms of astrology I practice, people going to jail for it, for there to be lawsuits against these individuals. We are now in the States, especially, it's very litigious here. I do worry a little bit about some of the blind, naive, hope that more people in the door is a good thing. But I'm also not interested in being the one at the door gatekeeping. So it's just something I'm noticing, and I just don't know how to feel about social media and astrology, to be honest.
It's interesting. I really have come to very similar conclusions to you. I think that astrology has resurgences over time, like with the Linda Goodman and that kind of thing, where you get this like wave of interest and then it sort of troughs again and then it peaks. And I think we're at a peak at the moment. I don't know if it's going to continue to peak, and we're on a kind of almost like an astrology tidal wave, because the age of information that we live in, it makes it so accessible that you can get sucked into anything you want to. I think I'm recalling now when we were at a conference, the ASC conference in Covent Garden for Frank and Wendy, and you did a short horary talk, and we were looking at 2020. I think we were thinking about what could happen. Might have been Wendy's talk actually, and you were discussing it as well. But we were talking about how insular people can get on social media, and how now we are living in a time that I used to listen to a lot of conspiracy podcasts back in the days of early Pluto in Capricorn, and they used to talk about, we're going to all find our tribes and we're all going to get together in our groups, and we're going to, to me, I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to go back to tribal living. This sounds really exciting. And like, I was just like really up for it. And as we're here in this time now, in this day and age, I'm understanding what they mean by these communities. And actually, it's like our thought as a collective is being kind of like shattered. And it's finding it hard to reintegrate with other people who don't think the same. And for me, the worst bugbear is politics. The political aspect of social media is really hard for me, because I really don't like to talk about it. I'm very interested to observe it. I'm such an observer. And I think with you and I having Aquarian planets, it's all about people watching. Like, you can watch it without getting emotionally involved. And it's just really difficult when the amount of astrology forums I've been in where someone would mention something about Donald Trump and there will be people just screaming at them for talking about Trump, and it's like, I'm talking about astrology. I'm talking about his astrology transits, and you can't talk about anything to do with that sort of thing without somebody taking offense. And that I find hard, because you need to learn how to, for me, this is where people are not understanding astrology on the level that I feel like we were. So at that ASC conference, one of them, you were asked whether the UK was going to Brexit and whether Trump was going to get voted in, and you were right on both counts. And you and I are the same.
Thank you for remembering that.
Of course I remember. I was also there, and I was thinking, I think they were talking about his solar arc directed sun was going to be moving into Virgo, and everyone was going, oh gosh, that's oppressive and blah blah blah. And I was thinking, no, that's service to the country. And you were saying the same stuff that I could see. We both were very much on the same page. But there were so many people that just were like, oh no, we can't, because they passionately did not like Trump and they passionately didn't want to Brexit. And they found it so hard to remove their emotional sort of like projections onto the subject. And that is where I think a lot of people fall short in astrology. You cannot remove that, the aspect of yourself.
It's because we don't teach ourselves how to do that in our normal lives. So why would we suddenly be able to turn that switch on when we're practicing astrology? Astrology isn't something that you come to and then suddenly you grow up when you touch this subject. If you are an immature heart or an immature mind walking into astrology, then your astrology is going to reflect. Because I use the metaphor of Aquarius. I am an Aquarius, and I think that it's helpful sometimes to think about our relationships to astrology based on our sun signs. And a really close friend of mine and colleague, Paul Kiernan, we talk about this all the time. He's a Gemini, and he moves through very similar kind of thought processes. And we talked about this idea about using your sun sign. So I think about the water bearer and the role of the astrologer being stood in between the heavens and the realm of spirit, and then matter and organic life. And our job really is to take the message and translate it and kick it back to the individual who's here to hear it. And even that model assumes that there's a person on the other end. There isn't always. I think we've gotten into a trap where we think all astrology is personality astrology, it's people astrology, mundane astrology, event, famine astrology, weather astrology. These things are collectives of people or more about natural events. This massive applications outside of what are your big three and what does it say about you as a person. But the point is, the message is going into a jug which the water bearer then pours out. And if the jug is filthy, it doesn't matter how much or how pure the water is going in, it's taking a little of you as it leaves. So is it taking mud, or is it taking an effort to clear yourself out of a lot of preconceived notions? Now, you can't ever remove the divine or away from divination, and I wouldn't want to, but you have got to be aware that part of you is getting passed through the message as well. And that's part of why you're in that role, because that little piece of you that's getting mixed in, I think the spiritually minded of us would assume that there's some purpose and reason for you to be the one to deliver that message as opposed to some other person. But it's hard. I think I'm in an interesting position on this because I saw firsthand what happened in the US in 2020. We're undergoing right now the murder trial. There is it Chauvin? I don't know how to say his name. The murder of George Floyd and Floyd, and the trial that's surrounding that. And I got to see what was being reported on the news and the videos that were showing up on Twitter about what was really happening. Wow. And they were not the same. They were not. Oh no. The television news was showing all sorts of things that had the implication of supporting the state. So supporting what the police were choosing to do, making people who were protesters look like violent rioters, making confusion about people who were rioting peacefully, and people, often white people in masks, who are actually using and riding the wave of that chaos to display the violent tendencies that they had within them from the start anyway. And what would happen on the mainstream news is they would collapse these into one group of people. Whereas on social media, you can actually see the protesters themselves. This is the group that we're protesting with. And you can see over here is an entirely separate group who's not with us, who's not united in cause. They are not in community, and they're doing so. So I have seen firsthand and read a couple really amazing articles about the value of social justice in social revolution and social movements. So on one hand, I think it's so powerful, the way that politics and social media can come together. I think the issue where you and I are in agreement is that it's the role of the individual. And these communities that we're building on social media, they're not really based on anything except for an assumption that we share core values, and we may not. We may not be in community as much as we think we are with each other. And to me, sometimes it feels like anti-community, where we are looking for reasons to to find division lines between us, instead of figuring out the best path to having meaningful conversations and enacting meaningful change towards a restorative justice direction, and move. So it's a bit messy. And I think part of the problem with politics in general right now is, we talk about this. I mean, if we take a look at what's going on in the world, it's clear it's not working. The astrology, we know, we had that Saturn Pluto conjunction in the beginning of 2020, and we got to see all that built up to it and what came as we're moving forward. Now we've got Saturn Jupiter moving into Aquarius. The pictures that we've got here, the Saturn Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, the tendency to self-police and to be policing other people in other communities. I mean, there was such a desire to control each other. And pretend like that was not the exact same mentality that created the colonialism, the imperialism, all the isms that we are actively striving to
I have to say, during 2020, literally the day of the Saturn Pluto conjunction, I was traveling and I started listening to a book.
Was it in January?
January the 12th. And I was going on a long drive and I started listening to an audio book called Wild Swans, and the book is about 26 hours, and it's literally about 3 generations of women growing up in China and the different political systems which handed over, and it's all women in the same family. It's just the most fantastic book, but I came away feeling completely in awe, because it's communists, the communism, just the things that were going on, and then seeing what was unfolding in 2020. And I also happened to listen to 1984 as well, George Orwell's. But when I came away from listening to that, I don't know why I listened to both of those books last year. They were probably like the most depressing books to ever listen to, but I just ended up getting sucked into this like kind of Orwellian worst case scenario political stuff. And with all of this stuff going on, I was looking around thinking, what the hell is happening? And seeing people policing each other, and it was just such a bizarre time to be alive. And
now we're at the Saturn Jupiter conjunction in Aquarius. We are entering into a new era. Things are moving and transitioning into, but are we more prepared now to build something better? I don't know if I can say that. I think we're still hacking at the branches instead of going for the roots. And unfortunately, if you're really good at going after the branches, it's very easy to get a massive amount of engagement on social media platforms. And so you get a lot of encouragement for very superficial activity. And even things that are totally in the right spirit and in the right direction aren't necessarily going deep enough to ask the real questions that are underpinning the struggles that we've got. So I don't know. I think this is going to be a lot of getting it wrong before we start to see us get some things right. But we've got to learn how to talk to each other. We have got to learn how to disagree, and we've got to learn how to disagree productively. And it's been, I think I mean, we're going down a politics route. We don't need to talk about this anymore. But anyway, it's just, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that's coming up on social media too, because with social media and astrology, we're in kind of a little bit of the same place where we do tend to build these kind of communities that are very welcoming of like-minded people only.
It's true. It's very true. And I have got a community of my own on Facebook, the Stellium Astrology community, is it's an astrology community, and I don't really like anything. I've had to kind of definitely get rid of a couple of people who've gone in and been very black and white about things like, oh, you've got a square in your chart, which means you are basically, they said anyone with squares in their chart in essence was like damaged. I think they used the words damaged. They said people would be damaged with squares in their chart, which I just ended up blocking that person. You get the odd person, but I'm quite an open-minded person, and I come from many different schools of thought when it comes to astrology. I've studied in lots of different places. I studied at the School of Traditional Astrology with Deb. I did a brilliant course with her, and you've worked with Deb Holding, haven't you?
Since 2015.
Yes, and Deb Holding is really quite an amazing horary astrologer, isn't she?
Yeah, well, I would say she's just a good astrologer, and she
Yes.
specializes in horse. She's good at just about everything you put in her direction, and she doesn't really get, I think, nearly enough credit in the States that she should. I mean, everybody in Europe and the UK know her name, but in the States, there's just a very different attitude towards the kind of astrology new entrants are interested in, and the kind of things that they expect, and some, you know, I think that there's better PR for other ideas, and but I hope more Americans, you know, invest a little bit in her website and her courses and get to know. And I think it's happening, and the STA is growing, and we're starting to have a lot more Americans enroll in the course. We used to have maybe 2 courses a year. We're doing 3 courses a year now. They're all booking up. Yeah, it's really exciting.
I have a lot of US based listeners to this podcast as well. So hopefully anybody listening, they need to check out Deborah Holding's website. She's got, is it SkyScript? There's one.
skyscript.co.uk. That's the one.
So I'm curious to know kind of how you found your way into astrology and what sort of brought you there.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, I had an interest in astrology since I was a kid. Linda Goodman was a very early introduction to me. I remember when we would go into bookstores as a kid, I would find, there was only ever, it didn't matter if this was a five floor bookstore, there was only going to be one bookshelf, one that had astrology books. And it was often things like Sydney Omar's forecast for the next X number of years and things like this. But there was a copy of Linda Goodman's Love Science, and I sat down and I read it, and every time, I mean, I was making it through little by little. But I didn't really, I didn't really take, I wanted to be, I think I remember when I was in high school, because my interest in astrology started in middle school. I was raised in a very religious family, though, fundamental. I mean, I was told astrology is the devil's work, you know, that it's Satan worshiping, that, you know, I might as well have brought a Ouija board into the house, all these kind of like very ignorant things to say. When I did a college course when I was in high school, that was given by somebody who went to church with us. And I just kind of said to myself, I'd like to be an astrological apologist at this moment, and just write, knowing that a charismatic Christian is going to be reading this, and how would I can be able to communicate to him that there's something to this? How do I do that? How would I figure out how to write this kind of idea? It was the worst thing I've probably ever written. I hate, you know, the way that I wrote when I was in high school. I read back some of that stuff, I'm like, oh God, it's terrible. But I wrote about the charts of some people who were very much in the news. I remember writing about Bill Clinton, and I think there were 2 other politicians whose birth charts I brought out. And I only focused on birth chart because I only knew birth chart astrology existed at that stage. I didn't know anything about mundane astrology, horary astrology, electional astrology, nothing. I just knew about natal astrology. And essentially my point was, you don't need to make the case that the planets cause anything. But knowing I was dealing with a Christian, it was like, you know, if we open up into any worldview where, you know, God created all things that exist, he created things to be in order, and to manifest his will, you know, I'm just using this kind of language all the way down, like, then it gets very difficult to explain why we should not be able to see indications of that order in nature around us. And it gets very awkward to explain why the movement of the planet should not in some way coincide with the, you know, the way that this machine that we're living in has been set up, you know, and the way that we can understand. And so I started to draw these kind of parallels between what was going on in Bill Clinton's chart. It was probably George W. Bush that I was using because he was president at the time. And just the difference between these presidencies and the different scandals that hit their career. I just, I got an A+ on that. I got like I got a perfect mark. And at the very top, all he wrote was, he said, all I'm going to say is you have me asking questions.
Wow.
And then gave it to me. And that felt really good. But then I went to college, and, you know, I went to college and met all these people who did not share an interest in astrology one lick. And it got to be a little bit embarrassing now to be the guy who's in college. I went through that phase of like, are you going to be serious and like actually take your education seriously? Are you going to continue to cling on to this very naive? So I ditched astrology for a while. But then I met somebody that I thought was cute and had a bit of a crush on, and he was into astrology. And I thought, right, there's my way in. So I had to like refresh my memory. I couldn't really remember all sorts of things. He introduced me to Skyscript, actually. That's how I found that
Oh,
website. He
wow.
used it
That's a
himself.
fated meeting.
I would agree. And so I said, well, that's it then. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to study astrology. And I found the London School of Astrology and the Mayo School of Astrology. And I don't know why, but I chose to enroll with the Mayo, and it may have been because it was a little bit less expensive, or maybe they were offering online and LSA wasn't.
I think they offered, I think they did online distance learning, and LSA has only just started doing that, really.
If that's what it was, then that's what it was, because I can't really, it was so long ago. This is 2012. So I enrolled. Wendy Stacy was my my tutor.
The
And
lovely Wendy Stacy.
And now she's one of my absolute best friends. She introduced me
Yeah.
to Deb at the 2012 UAC.
Wow.
And I just found my way in. I have an angular moon, and it doesn't matter what I do with my life. I collect mothers.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, so I've got Cancer on the 9th house cusp, and then the moon is in the 10th. And it's just everywhere I go, I just have very wise women who have children who are around me. And those are the people that I tend to connect with on a very deep level. So I just became such close friends with both of them. I studied horary with Deb, and that was a great experience. I was not making a lot of money at the time. I was working at the Gap, probably making like $9.25 an hour. I mean,
wow.
And that's dollars, not pounds, so it was, and I was living in Seattle. It was expensive. I saved up every penny I could to fly out to the UK to take the horary course live.
Wow.
Yep. So I had to pay for my flight, my hostel, and I was in a hostel, and this.
I stayed in a hostel once. It was an eye opener for me.
You learn a lot about human behavior.
Yeah, you do.
Let's put it that way. It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. I wouldn't do it again because a bitch is salaried now. But but I would have done it again. It was a lot of fun. But I had that great experience, and I emailed Deb afterward to just say, hey, listen, I'd like to be on the master's course. And she just wrote back and she said, in my heart, I know that you're meant to be doing this, and there's a 6-month wait list for this course, but if you're ready, I'm going to take you on now. And I just was like, oh my gosh. And she brought me to the top of the list and took me on, and I studied with her for a few years, and then she asked me to come tutor for the STA, and after I started tutoring for the STA, this is around that was in October of 2015, and that year, December 2015, or maybe it was December 2014, so it would have been the year prior, was my very first time speaking astrological on anything. It was for the San Diego, I think NCGR, and I spoke on electional astrology. And then a year later, I had my second talk, which is at a conference in New York State. It was like, wow. It was a lunchtime lecture. I wasn't getting paid anything, but it was like, if you want a place to go. And I went and I talked, and it was so exciting. And I do understand why. And I'm going to say this too. There's another thing that happens where students will jump in to learn something, and immediately, and I see this on social media all the time, they're turning tomorrow to go teach it. It's like, you haven't sat with this long enough. And I started studying in 2012, and I didn't ever attempt to teach anyone anything until really 2015. I had an opportunity to speak in 2014, but it was like, let me share with you what I'm researching. I'm not trying to teach you. I'm just going to share with you.
That's exactly the same as me. We started at the same time. We started sharing our ideas at the same time.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's
cool. I think that I really have not felt confident calling myself a teacher until more recently, really.
And I do think that's how it should be. On some level, I think even as much faith as I feel people put in me, I think I was too young to start teaching when I was teaching. I had a lot of things that I needed to kind of mature up about. But I had speaking engagements all over the place. I mean, in 2016 and 2017, I had an event every 3 weeks, and it was exhausting. I was burnt out. It was like,
it is. I don't think people realize how tiring it is, because it's not just about the talk. Like, it's the prep, the energetic sort of like stabilization you have to kind of practice, and the traveling there. Like, gosh, I don't think I had as many talks as you, but I can relate.
And also, when you show up somewhere, you also have to reckon, like, everyone's so excited to talk to you about astrology. And there was a period of time, like, even close friends, I feel so terrible about this, but like there were a close friend of mine. I actually like I kind of snapped at her next, and I was like, I can't talk about astrology right now. Like we have to talk about anything else. Like how is life? How's home? Like I just can't, So you go to these conferences and everybody just it's a lot. So I took some time off. So 2018, 2019, I was like kind of in the background, not really doing a lot, but I'm getting back into things now, and it feels really good, and I'm happy to be back. So
it's funny, it sounds like me and you are both kind of like in similar rhythms actually when it comes to our work. So we are kind of coming towards the end of the first half of our conversation. I just wondered, is there anything you want to share with people listening about any kind of work that you're doing, or I know you've got a book published, a William Lilly book, but if you've got anything you want to share and invite people to connect with you, and then we'll pick back up after we've filled up our cups again. What do you reckon?
Yeah, that sounds really good. So the first thing is Stephanie's just mentioned a book, and this is
it's so dark. Get your globes out. Oh
yeah. So it's backwards, but this is you can't see it I don't even know why we're trying.
I could see that. I could see that.
Okay, good. William Lilly was a 17th century English astrologer. Before the 17th century, if you wanted to study astrology, you needed to know Latin or Greek. I mean, you had to read these texts in languages that were not meant for the common person. And William Lilly basically kind of took a collection of texts and then translated them and created his own Christian astrology in English. And it was one of the first, if not the first, textbook on astrology in English. He wrote an autobiography, which is fascinating because he was practicing at the height of the English Second Civil War and was advising both sides of that battle in secret. And his life is really fascinating. I mean, he got himself in a lot of political trouble at different stages, and just the where astrology was at the time that he practiced was also very fascinating. So I picked up his autobiography to read it, and I realized I just couldn't understand a lot of the details. And I started annotating my way through it to help me understand, well, what does he mean by this? And what is he referencing here? And what does he mean by this? Somebody got wind that I was making this annotated version of his autobiography and got in contact to see if they could publish it. And so that's what this is. So if you're interested in learning about William Lilly's life, I wrote about a 20-page introduction. And then maybe is it 20 pages, 30, 40, about 50 pages, 50-page introduction. And then there's some, I think probably just shy of 300 annotations in here to help today's reader understand that. You can find me online, wadecaves.com, but I would also maybe say if you're interested in learning more, just visit the STA website, sta.co. And we have a lot of great courses there. 2 courses in particular. The first is developed by Deb Holding, the STA practitioners level Horary astrology course. And then Lee Lehman has also brought on her medical course, which is quite exciting. I'm in the process right now of developing a course on astronomy, which is taking a little bit longer than I'd hoped. It's called Astronomy for Astrologers. And the idea is to be able to take people who maybe, they have no real introduction to, why is the midheaven given the significations it's given? Why is the ascendant given the significations it's given? What is the ascendant? What is the midheaven? How are different house systems calculated? And, what is the logic behind these house systems? And I think the idea is to help people be able to see the mathematics involved, to be able to then draw from that an understanding of the psychology of each house system, because they do have their own psychologies and they have unique perspectives. And because of the way that they're sectioning out the sky, they aren't answering the same question. And there's very often just this belief that just choose the house system that you like best or that looks best to you in your software, and just don't ever ask any questions. And I'm very much like, no, please ask every question. And in fact, when I answer you, don't trust me. Go look for yourself.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That's a must for everybody studying.
Period. So anyway, so I'm excited to get that off the ground, because it's going to take us from understanding the astronomical precepts and the mathematics and the philosophical implications of some of these things. We'll move into chart calculation, and then the culmination of affairs will be understanding the different divisions of house systems, and then being able to demonstrate some mastery over why we would say Campanus and Regiomontanus, which are both space-based systems, why are they actually psychologically quite different? So
I think that we maybe can touch on that in the next segment, because it's a question that I like to ask everybody. Which house systems? I know I've learnt with you about Regiomontanus because of Horary and Electional, but also you did a class on intercepted houses as well, which we can apply to the Placidus system as well, can't we? So so let's touch on that in the second half. Thank you so much. I'm sorry to everybody listening about some of the sound issues, but hopefully we'll be a bit better once we've given our computers a bit of a break. So you ready to grab a drink, Wade?
Sounds good.
Okay, lovely. I'll see you in a moment then. Take care.